yes, we are going to send the slides out along with some other sort of follow-up information, and that sort of expected stuff about home group, we're going to leave that until the kind of information comes out afterwards, because I know it's the most boring first slide of most presentations, so we won't waste time doing that today. So we'll send out service leaflets, information and the slides after the call. We'll also send a survey out to see what else you might like any sessions on. If you want a session on kickboxing, don't ask us to do it, go to someone else for that one, but anything else that you think that home group might be able to kind of tell you a little bit more about, we'd be more than happy to do so. So today, if you've got questions, what we've seen, lots of people arriving, what we've seen work really well on other conferences and roundtables and so on, is if somebody asks a question, you think, oh yeah, I'd really like to ask that question as well. Just like the question so that we can see how many people are interested in any particular answer, so that my trusty colleagues, whose names are not up there on the slide, but that's Les Woodward and Rosie Lynch, will pick up those questions and make sure that we answer the ones that are most required to be answered. So today I'm joined by 3 home group colleagues, that's Andy Hayes, Gary Robinson and Heather Smith, who are going to in turn tell you about the vision that we had, the kind of the experiment, I suppose, to some extent, that we've put in place and that we have found is working amazingly well. But before I hand over to Andy, I'd like to welcome Claire Knox, who is our programme lead from Newcastle City Council, whose faith in home group and went along with us to sort of develop this vision and kind of different way of working was absolutely essential to it becoming a reality. And I think we've generously allowed Claire 3 minutes to tell us about the Newcastle perspective. So over to Claire.
Thank you, Sally. I'll just refer to some notes. So if anybody would like any copies of my notes afterwards, that's not a problem as well. So I suppose just to kind of give some context, in Newcastle, we commission a range of accommodation and support services through what we describe as being homelessness prevention and relief contracts. And these contracts very much have set the scene for us to be able to test and prototype service models that better respond to the causes of crisis. And by that, we mean homelessness, we mean rough sleeping, to help people to move on into suitable, sustainable and settled accommodation. And also to include opportunities for multidisciplinary responses. So think about things which are trauma informed and that are delivered within a psychologically informed environment. And we engage with the market over a number of months that helped us to co-design that approach. So we feel that by having that approach, it creates a framework for collaboration at a strategic, at a delivery and at a case level. So what we're effectively looking to do is to align responses across health, care and housing provision at key stages that will focus on reducing vulnerable people's risk of homelessness and to safely support them to move on from homelessness. So we're very mindful that there is many different agencies who work with many, many individuals, and quite often it can feel quite disjointed. So we know it's not easy, and we know that it requires a collective response, not only in actually making decisions, but also to the decisions that are made, and that we have to be able to compromise around existing pathways and processes to help us to develop more flexible responses. You know, we're all mindful that things can be quite regimented in terms of supporting people to achieve what they're able to support themselves to do and to fulfill their lives. And what we know is that we need to learn. So we need to think about reflective practice. We need to think about how we can engage with people who are using services and how collectively all of that can inform service models. What we see is there being 3 stages of opportunities to start collaborating on preventing homelessness. We see there being an opportunity to get people off the street. So we don't want to have anybody rough sleeping. And there's a partnership in Newcastle called Street Zero, which is around ending homelessness by 2022. Home Group sit on the board of that and are a really active member. It's about getting people into a home. So the length of stay in homelessness accommodation should only ever be appropriate to meet their needs and only for the time that they need to be in there. It's about moving from a hostel-led approach into a housing-led approach, so supporting people to live independently as soon as they're able to do so. And we're very much thinking about how we can transform our accommodation offer in Newcastle as well to help us to respond to that ambition. And then we have sustaining a home. So this is where we want to see a really innovative approach where there's no evictions into homelessness. So thinking across not only our commissioned supported accommodation offer, but also across general needs, how we can maximise support, how we can develop and further maximise partnership opportunities, and how we can respond to needs to prevent people being evicted into homelessness. So for us, partnership working and collaboration is key to this. And we're taking this conversation around how we can develop a more integrated health and social care and housing response with our health and social care colleagues. We've become closer engaged with the Collaborative Newcastle Partnership. For those of you who don't know much about that, I can again share some information. And that's around how we improve the health, wealth and well-being of people in Newcastle. And that really takes us to where we are with Home Group. And we're really, really excited about the model that they've developed in response to the core design that we've done, and how they're helping us to respond to some of these ambitions that we've set out as a city.
Thank you, Claire. Brilliant. Excellent introduction. So we're going to move on now to Andy Hayes, who is our operations manager, who has kind of led on the development of the model. And he's going to talk a little bit about why. Why have we done this? What changes did we perceive were needed? So over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks, Claire, for setting the scene there and the context. So we're very fortunate. We've worked with Claire and her commissioning colleagues in the City Council for a number of years, particularly in homelessness. But just picking up on what Claire was thinking about there and Home Group's strategy, we were really keen to develop that and think about what we could do fundamentally as a housing provider to integrate health and social care and housing within a homeless context. And really our motivation behind doing that was what we probably termed the changing pressures in Newcastle, and also the ambition that Claire talked about of eradicating street homelessness in Newcastle via the Street Zero Partnership. We absolutely believe that we can achieve that. It's no tall order. It's a it's a big thing to do, but we believe that we can succeed in that. And in thinking a little bit more about the changing pressures, what we thought about there was what our frontline staff consistently told us. So what they were seeing was customers who were presenting with more behaviours that challenge. And we were also really struggling with customers who presented with dual diagnosis challenges. So those with struggling mental health difficulties and also battling drug and alcohol addiction. And trying to navigate that person into the health system to make sure that they get the support and care that they needed. And that's really challenging. So when we make those comments, and when I make those comments, that's not a criticism. Our health service is a wonderful service. We just know it's underfunded and at overcapacity. So we were really motivated to see what work we could do around that to support that. And actually, true to our model, we've done a bit of reflection. And if we're honest, we probably contributed to some of the difficulties in there, because I think we can now reflect and say that we probably presented customers at the wrong stage in their journey into those services because we didn't fully understand them. And by not fully understanding them, the chances of success in those health related services was probably very low. So that's a bit of honesty and reflection from us. So thinking about that then, in March 2018, we carried out some quantitative research, and the figures are there in front of you. And we looked at all our customers currently residing in our homeless accommodation-based services, and we found that 63% of our customers reported as having a diagnosed mental health condition. 12% came to us and said, well, I'm not diagnosed, but I'm having some difficulties. And total that all up, we had 3 out of every 4 customers had some form of mental health illness. So we looked at that and we did the co-production work with Claire and our commissioning team. And that's when we created this vision to employ a clinical team. And at a very high level, the vision was around a clinical team to support our staff, to better support our customers, to get better outcomes for them, but also longevity of outcomes. So if someone falls into homelessness, and of course there's many reasons why that is. We wanted to be able to work with those customers, understand them, understand what was driving the behaviours, get them into the appropriate services, get the scaffolding around them to enable the customer to move on into their own accommodation. And we felt that with that model, if we could get that right, we would get longevity of outcome. And I mean this in the nicest possible way. When a customer leaves our service, we desperately don't want to see them again. We want them to go out and live a very fulfilling and rewarding life out in the community. So to that effect, our clinical model is based around, we have one clinical psychologist, 2 mental health practice leads, and we have an OT, and they work directly with our frontline staff, and Heather's going to talk to us a bit more about that. It would be remiss not to mention the dreaded COVID in this context. So COVID's obviously raised the profile of homelessness, and I think it's fair to say the political debate continues about whether homelessness is a health or housing matter. We're not going to enter that debate today. We certainly don't have time for that. But what we believe is we've created a model that can operate in the grey between health and housing. And that's really important to us because we have services full of homeless people now, here and now. We can't wait for systemic change in government thinking. And the final point I'd just like to make is, just out of interest, we reran that quantitative research in March of this year. Just a couple of weeks ago, we finalised that, and I don't think anyone will be surprised by the statistics. So jumped to 72% of diagnosed mental health conditions, 8% saying I'm not diagnosed, but I'm having some difficulties. So 4 out of every 5 customers have some form of a mental health issue in our homeless accommodation services. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. So now we're going to get into the detail, the nitty gritty, which, as Andy says, Heather is going to take us through. So she's going to talk to us about the psychological framework, the environment, all the bits that make a difference and have made this model successful. So over to Heather.
Hello everyone. So when we started about just over a year ago, we ran some focus groups with the customers and with the staff teams in the different services, trying to think about what were the issues that they really wanted most addressed. And actually there was a lot of similarity in the themes that came through. So a lot of the customers talked about feeling stuck in the system, but so did our staff team. They talked about feeling stuck, and as Andy explained, about unable to access the things that they believed were the right supports for some of the customers. The customers talked about a loss of identity, a loss of, being identified as homeless, that's all I am from now on. And the staff talked about a sense of feeling alone and dumped on, that sometimes services would take a step back once somebody was placed in a supported accommodation, believing that those needs were being met. There was also issues around boundaries, around fear of change or fear of things staying the same. And both groups talked about a sense of not feeling valued, understood, heard, and generally feeling unsafe. And so that's the main reasons that psychologically informed environment can kind of help with these issues. We want a staff team who are feeling valued, who feel that the work that they're doing is valued. And we want a customer group who are feeling valued, listened to and heard, and obviously feel safe. So thinking about a pie, there are 5 main ingredients to a pie, and each of these ingredients is as important as each other. You can't have just 1 or 2 elements. You have to consider the importance of all of these, and we're going to talk in depth about each of these elements shortly. But it's the psychological framework, the environment, managing relationships, staff support and training, and of course evaluating outcomes. We need to make sure that the choices and the changes that we're making are creating positive benefit, and it's not just because somebody had a good idea. But we need to make sure that you don't forget anything off that list. So Home Group have a life model as a way of supporting in all of their supported services. The green symbols at the bottom, well-being, skills and physical health, are the basic roots that we need to get in place in order to be able to support somebody. And the blue elements at the top are about how we support somebody. So we're talking about strengths-based, person-centred and psychologically informed, and that with all of those elements in place, that actually our customer will be able to live independently and feel enabled. It's about that positive model of support and really taking into consideration a really holistic view of each individual's needs. So thinking about psychological framework. So you might have come across trauma-informed care places before. So they would mainly focus on a psychological framework. So it's about understanding the makeup that shapes current behaviour and presentation. Why one person self-harms isn't the same reason why another person self-harms. We need to be really person-centred and individualistic when we're trying to understand these difficulties for people. It really influences the language that we use and the approach of a service to improve communication and good practice. What a lot of our staff team have commented on is that now they've started using health language when they contact places like the crisis team to raise concerns about a customer. They feel like they're being listened to a little bit more. They feel like their opinions are being valued, and it's improving those working relationships with those other services. It does have to be trauma informed. We have to recognise the high levels of trauma within this customer group and embedding an understanding of the links between trauma and homelessness, and also around attachment theory to help inform the work with customers. If we're trying to support somebody who struggles with people, we need to have an understanding of how that works in order to be able to shape and be flexible with that support to actually be able to create some change. And that's where all that formulation work really comes in helpful. So the framework that we use in our Newcastle services draws on three main psychological approaches. That's cognitive behavioural therapy, dialectical behaviour therapy, and cognitive analytical therapy. Under no circumstances are our support staff becoming therapists. Our job is not to replace statutory services. Our job is not to deliver therapy. It is to create stabilisation, to help people move to a position where they can engage with statutory services. And the next slide, I think, will explain that a little bit better. So if we're thinking about this trans-theoretical model or the cycle of change, top centre there we've got pre-contemplation, no intention on changing behaviours. And this is where a lot of our customer groups sit. We would then be as services referring to drug and alcohol services, to mental health services, entirely inappropriately. Because it's not until you get round to the preparation stage where evidence-based practice and those services are able to deliver their interventions. You need to be taking responsibility, they need to be engaged in their own care and treatment. And then of course we move through to action, maintenance, and then quite often relapse does occur. And at this point, again, we would refer people back into drug and alcohol services, again, when it really wasn't appropriate. So we see our role in the homeless supported accommodations as supporting people to move from pre-contemplation through contemplation into preparation. And we have the added bonus of access to the customers. The support is there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have more time to achieve that, where statutory services don't have that. A 1 hour a week session with a CPN is going to take months to achieve that change, whereas we have the access, we can do that. We also have the consistency of the team approach in the accommodations to be able to help move people around that cycle of change, to be able to engage in those services. Okay, so we've got to think about the physical environment. We need a sense of safety and security across the services for both customers and staff. If we're working with people with trauma backgrounds, we need to try and make sure that people feel safe so that they can stay on their baseline or within their window of tolerance. My health colleagues will understand that. It's about helping people be able to think clearly. And when we get frightened and we're pushed out of our comfort zone, that can go offline, but also need that for our staff as well. We need them to be coming into work and feeling safe and knowing that they can think things through clearly so that they're able to make really, really positive and well-informed decisions. We need appropriate and safe therapeutic spaces for one-to-ones with confidentiality, opportunities to engage in meaningful activity. And if my OT colleague was here, she would be talking about the structure and the routine that's needed, again, to create that stability, to reduce the chaos in somebody's life, to allow them to be able to engage. Sensory considerations, lighting, noise levels, especially with some of our ADHD customers or autistic customers. And it also needs to be aesthetically pleasing to create that sense of value that got mentioned in those focus groups. We can't expect people to improve their self-esteem and sense of self-worth if we don't show that we value them. And Home Group do that in a great way through their hotel at home philosophy. And that's about us as a service investing in the customers and investing in the staff. And that can really help kind of shift some of that self-esteem stuff. Managing relationships. I think a lot of time there's a lot of focus on relationships with customers, but it's so much bigger than that. We need the relationships within the staff team to be running smoothly. We need the staff's relationships with higher management to be running smoothly, but also with our other services that we work with. So that's police, crisis team, community mental health teams, social workers. It's about all of those relationships and making sure that everybody that we're communicating with has a sense of feeling heard and feeling valued. There needs to be clear boundaries and communication around roles and responsibilities, who does what when, so people feel confident in saying yes and saying no, and that they know what their job is. And we need an improved understanding of challenging behaviours to facilitate that therapeutic relationship. We're trying to support the staff team to not get frustrated and burnt out with what could be quite a complex and difficult customer group. And we want to try and improve that empathy and compassion and understanding of how difficult change is for that customer group, and ultimately to avoid further exclusion. We need to role model for our customers about how we manage relationships with other services, so that when they get their own tenancies and move through life, they can then engage in the real world and not be segregated, as tends to happen. Okay, so how do we do that? We offer a lot of support and training, so relevant and engaging training. So if we've got a particular customer with a particular diagnosis coming into a service, we'll do a special piece of training specifically around that, around the difficulties that might arise, things to look out for, helping the staff team feel confident with whatever's coming through the door. We cover different learning styles. As Claire mentioned earlier, reflective practice is a really important part of psychologically informed environments, and our services get team reflective practice once a fortnight. We also offer monthly individual supervision and case management, where we talk with the support staff about the individual customer's needs, but also about how we manage the relationships and the support and the engagement with those individual customers. And of course, as a team, they support each other through peer support. And we have staff who have lived experiences and know much more than we do about what it's like to be in a service. And we have to listen to them when they're telling us what it's like and what's happening. And our management teams run brilliant conversations, which is again a way of making the staff team feel valued. It's an opportunity for them to vent and to feel listened to and heard, and address those issues that were coming through in those focus groups. And here we are with a model of reflective practice for anybody who's not familiar with it. So as a staff team, we'd get together, obviously because of COVID, it's all on Teams, but they would bring in experience, either positive or negative, Then we would discuss as a team any observations or reflections, so different perspectives on the situation, and would also look at developing ideas of how things could have gone better, or how we did everything that we could, and validating how hard this team have worked. And then maybe if that situation comes up again, we can test those ideas in practice, and that brings us back around in the cycle. It's a brilliant opportunity for growth, for learning, for sharing good practice, but it's also a really safe place to feel validated when things have been pretty tricky. If we've had a significant incident, staff team have felt that they've been able to share some of the difficulties that perhaps they took home with them and get them off their chest, and to feel supported by their team, which is imperative if we're going to have a team that doesn't burn out and that can continue to support our customer group. And I think I hand over to Gary at this point.
Indeed,
Yeah.
perfect time.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, this is again one of the key points of the model. Is probably exercised us a little bit at the start. How do you actually measure the success of what we're doing and get that embedded across the services? So these 7 sort of key outcomes and evaluation criteria, they actually came from a combination of the working group that we set up to drive this model forward and get it implemented on the ground. So some of these come from the staff themselves, but also obviously some of them are contractual obligations in terms of our KPIs. And it's probably a mix of customer and staff focused. So in terms of the success criteria, we measure very carefully against our home group values, which those 4 are listed there, and ensure that staff are displaying the positive behaviours to be able to drive customer improvement forward, but also to create that model amongst the staff team themselves. And then sharing good practice, we didn't want to just keep this in-house and keep it to ourselves, because we believe in the model. So obviously it established initially in Newcastle over the last 12 months or so, but we're now spreading the word more widely, both internally into other local authority areas, and there's been some growth in Durham, but also corporately across the organisation in terms of like upwards and sideways across our peers and senior management, but also externally as well. Certainly within Newcastle, we promoted it to Northumbria Police, who we work closely with, but also start to share it out amongst partners who we work with across the city as well, in terms of trying to influence their models and their support practice. In terms of the contractual obligations, we've got various contractual KPIs, and we see this as being a way of trying to improve those and how we perform against those key indicators, which commissioners set for us within our contracts. The customer promise is something we have for customers. We make 6 key pledges to customers and how we're going to deliver their support. This is both for supported customers, but also general needs customers. So it's to try and drive the standards up and what we're actually delivering for customers, not just in terms of supported, but also across into our general needs stock and the customers within them as well. And staff wellbeing and engagement. The success of the model is very much dependent on staff being engaged and willing to like change and improve their practice. And we measure that through our Great Place to Work survey. A lot of this is like upskilling staff to be more competent and understand customers and how their support needs need to be met. And the last survey that we had at the back end of last year demonstrated a great improvement, so that we were able to demonstrate that model is starting to take hold amongst the staff group. Engagement in the survey was probably the best it's been for several years, if not ever. But also a lot of the answers were very positive about how staff were feeling about how they're perceived within the organisation. Then in terms of, is the PI model working? Some of the things we look at are in terms of the risk management of customers and how we manage incidents. And it's evident from the reports that we get from our internal system that they've been managed much more effectively. Staff understand customers much more, so they can take sort of mitigation actions before incidents happen. So there's been a reduction in some of the more serious incidents. by better understanding of what the triggers are for customers. In terms of the improvement of customer self-sufficiency, we demonstrate to them that the consequences of what they do or don't do, that every action they take will have an implication. So, for example, if they don't pay their rent, there's a consequence potentially, and that's going to go with them wherever they go once they leave the service. They need to be aware that that's an important aspect of living in society generally. And probably the main vehicle we do use for that is our Home Achievement Programme. So this is a programme which we set up ourselves several years ago. It's a recognised qualification whereby we can equip customers with the skills to live independently through being able to manage a budget, being able to manage the health, the daily living skills, etc., etc. And we're finding that there's a great increase in that over the last probably 3 or 4 months as this model's become embedded. That's going hand in hand with the HAP programme. And then just finally on there, as it's been mentioned several times, is to see reduction in homelessness and no street homelessness. We don't want to see any representations of people once they leave the service. We want them to be able to live independently, and we're sort of busy working on a tool to monitor that and making sure that's sustainable, so we can track them after periods of time of like 3 months, 6 months, and so on. And if they do need some support or they're struggling, we can provide some floating support, perhaps like make sure they can maintain their independence rather than come back into the homelessness system. Next slide, Andy, please. So just on the previous slide, some of the quantifiable stuff that we've got on there, such as the HAP and the contractual outcomes, we've created a dashboard which gives a visual presentation of how we're actually performing. But some of the key sort of highlights on there is the added value as well, not just the contractual stuff and the feel-good stuff. It's the added value to society in general. So there's 3 surveys which we try to encourage customers to engage in. So there's a wellbeing survey, which, as you can see on there, there's been a huge improvement on that. 62% of customers are reporting an improvement in their wellbeing from the time when they start with us to the time when they leave. Their quality of life, they're talking about a 71% average increase in their quality of life during that time with us. And this is all against the background that this is like the last calendar year, so it's against the background of the pandemic as well, which is probably more noteworthy. And then finally, just on the added value socially, there's a social value survey which we do, again, which is completed by the customer about how they're feeling in terms of their engagement with statutory services, health, criminal justice, etc., etc. And that's demonstrating a huge value, potential saving to the public purse over the course of that period as well, of around 23k per customer. So that's added value when you talk about the current pressures on public finances as well. And the other sort of chart on there is just around the customer move on. So 18% of customers during the last year moved into their own independent tenancy, whether with social landlord or private sector, and 34% moved across into different type of supported accommodation. So, for example, somebody might move from a hostel into like some dispersed property in the community, but still receive support. So it's a gradual phasing into independence rather than just jumping straight from a hostel into something which might not be suitable. So it's very much customer led. And again, we've got a directive, a pledge, which we fully believe in it. We don't actually move anybody on into homelessness. So if there is a problem, with customer misbehaving or antisocial behaviour, we'll always find a solution and we'll always move them into somewhere more appropriate rather than actually evict them into homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. So I think that, I've got an echo. I think that we are going to have a look at a case study. I think Heather's going to present a case study. But in the meantime, if you've got questions, then do stick them in the chat so that we can have a look and allocate them to the right person to answer, who will then be horrified that they've been given that question to answer. But nevertheless, we will do that. So do pop your questions down and we'll look at those when we've looked at the case study with Heather.
Okay, so we're going to have a think about 3 different customers who we've supported over the last year. The first is a 48-year-old male who is currently living in a 1-bedroom housing first unit, but when we first met with him, he'd been street homeless for some considerable time. He was addicted to heroin, was isolated, subjected to physical and financial abuse by his peers, and was really struggling. He then had actually lost, due to sepsis, had a leg removed and was in hospital for a considerable period. And we managed to work with him, to support him, to engage with him, to understand some of his issues, to be able to get him to engage with drug and alcohol services, with our occupational therapist, and get him on a methadone program, and now got significantly reduced methadone consumption. That's come right down and is doing much better. And again, it's about that piece of work, that stabilisation piece of work, to allow people to engage with the statutory services. We're not trying to replace them. We're just supporting people to engage with what is actually already commissioned. Next customer there, 37-year-old male who is currently in one of our homeless hostels, who was discharged from hospital to there with significant mental health problems. He'd been in hospital for around 18 months, and significant self-harm. And again, really struggled with engagement, struggled with drug and alcohol and misuse, and a lot of safeguarding around his vulnerability and people exploiting him financially. We have managed to work with the staff team, supported him with using DBT skills, with using other coping strategies, trying to skill him up in ways to manage his emotions and understand his emotions, that it's not as significant an issue as it was, which is reduced crisis team contact, it's reduced A&E attendance, and it's reduced hospital admissions, because he was getting admitted to hospital for physical health as a result of his self-harm. So although that we've not finished that job yet, we've seen major improvements in his engagement, in his insight and understanding and ability to engage, and his improvement in his quality of living as well. The last lady there, 42-year-old female who was in place at Cedar House, had been in a number of different placements over a number of years, which had all, there was a pattern of behaviour where those placements had all fallen apart, and there wasn't really an overview as to why that was happening or an understanding of why that was happening. So what we were able to do in a time that she was in our service was to support the social workers with things like capacity assessments, because again, we had 24-hour view of this lady's presentation. Yes, she was alcohol dependent, she had physical health problems, considerable physical health problems. But unfortunately, the way that statutory services work is you have to book an appointment. And unfortunately, if our customers either don't attend or attend under the influence, then they're not able to do the pieces of work that they need to do to understand the customer to be able to move them forward. And so we supported them with that. We supported them with a psychological assessment, with an occupational therapy assessment, and actually discovered what would be the most helpful placement for that lady moving on. And as I said, she's now in a residential care setting. But those needs weren't identified because the social worker wasn't able to do her job because of the chaos that this lady was living in. And so we were able to, we felt great pride in supporting that system and you know, feeling heard as staff that our views were important.
Thank you, Heather. While you go and do some behaviour therapy with your dog.
Yeah, apologies for that.
It's all right. We'll pick up some of the questions. People have been very polite and actually waited to the end. So we will pick up those. In the meantime, I just wondered, I think that probably one of the things that people will wonder is, well, that's all very well, but this all sounds quite expensive. And I wondered if Andy and perhaps Les might want to sort of dip in terms of kind of the commercials and how we've kind of worked this out and justified the additional costs. Has Andy gone to sleep?
Andy's gone to sleep. Maybe I need to jump in.
Yeah, maybe you do.
I think there is a cost to this model, and we've in home groups basically footed the bill for it within our envelope of the rental income and the commissioners' funding we get. But the reality is it's worth investing into, is what we're thinking, because that extra money. The additional outcomes you get, the better outcomes you get for your customers, definitely is just provides that better value for money. So yeah, there is a cost, but yeah, it's worth it doing.
Yeah,
I think I would just jump in there as well to say that we're very fortunate that we're commissioned in a large contract. So we're commissioned to provide over 400 beds, and Home Group provides 150, 160 of those directly. But what we think can happen with the model is, if you've got the size, great, employ your own MDT, but the model would still have value if you started with one clinician. And we're certainly starting to see that with some of our other services up and down the country in Home Group. So you don't need the full MDT to get up and going. Yeah,
absolutely. Penny's asked a question. She says, this sounds fantastic, but how do we get all providers to work this way? Paragon Housing in Surrey make the process impossible. What can we do to turn this around? How can I, as an outreach worker, address this? Don't know who wants to pick that one up.
I'll jump in on that, Penny. I can hear exactly what you're saying, having been a frontline provider and tried to get access into accommodation-based services. It's very, very difficult. I think this is a culture change. There's no doubt about it. And an awful lot is based on relationships. So when Claire was talking about Street Zero in Newcastle, that's a concept that we've all signed up to. It's driven by a chap called Bob Eldridge, and he is very motivated, and actually he holds us all to account. And I think it's probably fair to say, Claire, I don't know whether you want to jump in here, but we've seen a shift in the approach to our homeless provision, and this desire to really work together, because we can't beat around the bush. There's commercialisms involved in this, but we've got that sole belief, and I think that holds us to account and drives that partnership working.
I think Claire did put her hand up, so I think she's got something to add to that.
Yeah, and I would completely echo what Andy said about it being kind of a culture change. You know, our commissioning approach in terms of how we have structured our homelessness system in Newcastle has evolved over many, many years. And I think partnership work and co-design is really, really important. And it's about understanding not only how the market can respond, but also how they can be how they can be supported to respond as well. And we know that these things don't just happen overnight. Obviously, because of austerity, there are less longer term contracts, and I know that does pose its own problems in terms of how providers can invest in not only assets but also in kind of service delivery models. But in Newcastle, we have a really strong political support for our homelessness prevention system. You know, we have cabinet members who lead on our quarterly homelessness prevention forum, and they are really, really invested in all of the good work that happens in Newcastle. So for me, it's about being really, really open about what your intentions are as a local authority. It's about understanding how the market can respond, but also about kind of wanting to test new ways of working. So don't just become entrenched in what has happened and gone before. Think about what we can do to maximise our resources. And on the Street Zero front, you know, Andy is right in that Bob does hold us to account. You know, he's independent from the local authority, and he very much will go off with an agenda that is around achieving the aims of Street Zero. And I think it's, you know, it's a partnership that has tested kind of how we come together as well. And we are learning and the aims are evolving, but it very much is still our foundation of ending rough sleeping in Newcastle by 2022.
Thanks, Claire. Lloyd has asked a question saying he's a GP working in Dudley looking at starting homeless health services. Do you have any dedicated primary care service for homeless health in Newcastle? Did GPs engage or play a role with what you've done?
This might be another one for me as well, Sally. Although I do know that Guy Pilkington is on the call. I don't know whether or not Guy might want to come in if he's able to. But you know, we do have obviously we do have more, I think, of a secondary homelessness health response. There are a number of commissioned and grant funded and CCG funded health-based responses in the city, and working with Collaborative Newcastle, we want to see how we can maximise those services and how we can work better together to respond to people's needs. So some of the grant funding has allowed us to test different ways of working, but invariably, because they are only 12 months, trying to make real system change is quite difficult. So I find that we're having to very much, you know, continue to demonstrate the value of that investment, and to see how we can secure longer term funding for those health-based responses.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I think this is probably another one for you from Tina, which is how is the commissioned service funded? FHSG or HRS from Newcastle and our Newcastle single tier local authority?
Yes, so we're a single tier local authority. I must confess I don't know what those acronyms are, so I don't know if Tina can.
Actually, I just said them like I did.
Sorry, it was a homeless support grant and housing related support, which were the two sort of common funding streams that were previously used to fund this sort of service.
Back in the day.
So I suppose, yeah, supporting people type funding is really what it would have been back in the day, and certainly, obviously, once that ring fencing and the size of that budget greatly reduced, we've had to work really, really hard to maintain our funding. So it just comes out of the general fund at the moment. We obviously receive separate homelessness prevention funding, you know, which supports our statutory function, but from a commission perspective, it's a combination of our commission budget and housing benefit.
And I think Tina's also asked a second question about single people and does the service only meet the needs of single people? I think this would probably be one for Andy or Les.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So yeah, most of the accommodation is based on single people. However, this round of commissioning, we had a conversation about that, and we've actually, Home Group have commissioned a couple of units, dispersed units in the community where we can look to accommodate couples. And then the city also have their own provision that accommodates homeless families. That's a fantastic new build provision called Cherry Tree. And it's a really, really brilliant service and part of the homeless jigsaw in Newcastle.
Yeah, that's our statutory temporary accommodation provision.
Thank you, Andy and Claire. Christine has said, given the identified mental health needs of customers, has the model had any impact on capacity for mental health services to engage with people with needs which include drug and alcohol, i.e. commonly labelled dual diagnosis? I wonder if this is one for Heather?
Yes, so although we haven't got any specific data around that, I do feel that they're going to have far fewer inappropriate referrals. I think quite sometimes if somebody's drinking and using substances, it's automatic you would make a referral to a service, whereas now we're thinking about when is the right time, when is it appropriate, and also when people are discharged from services, working with those services with things like RAP plans, that the support staff have an understanding of how to use those and how to support the customers with using those, so that hopefully we can prevent relapse in the future. But unfortunately, no specific data.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I think that gets us to the end of the questions that have been written in the chat. If anybody wants to put their hand up or shout out instead, don't fancy writing, then that's absolutely fine. I'll give it a 30 seconds or so. I don't know. Oh, there's a hand up. Let's see whose hand that is. Siobhan, have you got a question?
Hi. Yeah, good afternoon. I'm assuming from what's been said that this is the arrangements are in a commission service. Does the clinical team work across the statutory service as well, or is it only available within the commission services, the old housing related support services, or sorry, the old supporting people services?
Andy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks, Siobhan. So the clinical team works directly for Home Group. Home Group has a clinical infrastructure and governance that allows us to employ directly, and they only work within our own services. We have a prime contract in Newcastle, and we have subcontractors who operate on behalf of us. So just at Home Group at the moment, but we also do work within our psychologically informed work to support the partners, and we're really at the early stages of working back with our commissioning team to talk about the work that we've developed to support the rest of the city. Does that answer?
It does, thank you.
Yeah, we made a decision, I suppose, about 4 or 5 years ago, that we would start working with some clinicians directly in our services nationally, actually. So we've got a central clinical hub as well that offer sort of best practice guidance and so on to our colleagues working out in the business. But in some of our bigger services like Newcastle, that's where we've been able to, because of the critical mass that we've got, been able to recruit and employ people directly within services too. Any other questions? I see Guy has slept in replying to Lloyd as well in the chat there, Lloyd, if you want to have a look at that. Guy is saying the CCG funds a small number of practices to provide extra to homeless and hostel residents. It's rather disjointed, but work is going on to see how it might be better coordinated. I think a lot of it comes down to close working relationships across GP practices and the housing and support providers, as it always does, Guy, you're quite right. There's another hand up. You can't see the name of the hand up. Can anyone?
Oh yeah, so it's Vicky. I'm an approved mental health professional, so I do mental health act assessments. Has any conversations been had with the acute inpatient mental health settings about accepting homeless individuals? Because I think they're concerned about discharge to and all these kind of things, that it can be quite difficult to get them into mental health units.
Who's going to pick? I keep picking on Andy. He's poor.
Yeah. I could take this one. It's okay.
Okay.
So we have customers who are admitted to hospital from our services, and sometimes it is actually appropriate for them to be discharged to those services. We are not a specific mental health as such. We are still a homeless crisis service. But actually, with the staff team's understanding and knowledge of the customers and therapeutic relationships built up before an admission, and that sometimes that can actually be really helpful. I do hear what you're saying about, because obviously we don't do things like managed medication and things like that, which you possibly would get in a mental health specific service. But yeah, I think it's about, again, that person-centered approach about what's going to benefit the customer the most, what do they need, and so what is most appropriate. And so we're involved in 117 assessments and discharge planning on the wards.
Cool, brilliant.
Thanks, Heather. And Siobhan has also said, can we have a copy of the questions and answers? And yeah, we'll make sure that that goes out with the other bump that we send out afterwards. Yeah, I don't think there are any other questions, unless anybody's got any last final ones. So all it leaves me to do is to say thank you all very much for joining us. Oh, there is one more question. Craig is saying, are you engaging with officers of the Police and Crime Commissioner in any of the areas where you're delivering a service? I think the answer is probably yes there. I'm guessing this is an either Andy or Les response.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Hi, Craig. So we've delivered a version of this to our local policing teams. We met with Chief Superintendent in town, and then went out further to the local inspectors, because one of the key things that we want to do in that is to hopefully educate the police in terms of what we're doing and the pathway that we're taking with our customers to get a reflective policing response that supports that. And I have to say the 4 police inspectors that we met, they were hugely engaged. And one of them said, and I'll quote this, he said, there's 2 people that I can think of who are currently accommodated in your services, and they're not coming to our attention. And those sorts of things in real policing terms mean that he was saying that that relates to freeing up approximately 30% of his frontline policing time, not dealing with that small handful of individuals. So they're really engaged, and to be honest, we need to go to the next step and deliver this to the frontline cops on the street, the police on the street.
Thanks, Andy. So we will draw it to a close there. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Thanks to the speakers, obviously my home group colleagues, but particularly to Claire and Newcastle City Council, without whom this would not have been made possible, and all the partners that we work with as well within Newcastle, our sort of other providers who have kind of gone along with us on this journey. So thank you all very much. We will send out the details to you all, and once again, thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.